And welcome to Gaming Mechanics, a podcast that seeks to explore the unexplored topics of games, how they work, and why we love them. With me today is Anonymous Goose.
Honk.
Yes, I'm so glad you honked. A.K.A. Greg. His real name's Anonymous Goose, but we sometimes call him Greg. And welcome. So this week we are going to be discussing little teeny tiny games. Or are they?
That was the first pitch for what to call these types of games, and it somehow didn't catch on. But that's what we tried.
Yeah, you picture a bunch of execs in a room like micro games.
I know, like
tiny games, game bites,
midget games. No,
that's just offensive.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
I was putting it back in like the 70s, though, so you know.
Oh, okay. Well, that's okay. Yeah, that's not
wasn't offensive back then.
Exactly. So yeah, minigames are not like something that get a lot of attention, obviously, because they really don't constitute like an entire game.
There's so many. I forgot they even existed.
Yeah, pretty much. So that's one of the things
really that much anymore.
Yeah, that's true. They're certainly like fallen out of vogue. They survive in a few like corners, almost as Easter eggs sometimes.
Right.
And they're usually pretty easy to embed in games now because they're generally very, very simple to program. But we wanted to take a little bit to talk about what makes a minigame a good addition to a game, and how it can help change up the pacing and the feel, and just augment a game in a specific way.
Well, yeah. It came to an interesting question, which was in games that aren't entirely minigame based, which we'll get to in a little bit. Why do minigames exist at all in games that, in theory, if they're complete, and they do, and I think there are good ways to do it. It's not like it's just it's a specifically and horribly, objectively bad thing to do at all times. You can put minigames to games and it works. So.
Yeah.
The question is, why does that work? One. Two, why, if you can do these things that are fun by themselves, why are there these certain tasks you can do in games that work as mini-games but wouldn't work as a game itself? Like, why there seem to be a specific set of criteria that you have for an interactive gameplay that seem to appear over and over again, but never in its own entire game state. So hence today's discussion, minigames.
Yeah, well, so even like, just to give you an idea of, this idea is pretty old, even older than you might think you could actually put a game in a game, right? You think you'd have to have a game that had a certain level of complexity before you start putting another game inside of that game, right?
Right.
But like even Legend of Zelda, like the original one, had mini games where you would play, and then in those games they were basically set up like fair booths, and you would win heart pieces by like using your arrows to shoot targets and things like that. And that really could be considered a minigame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think you came up an interesting a point, Mark, in terms of when we were I was about to say pre-gaming. We don't really we do prep for the precasting.
Yes.
I think we should just call it pre-gaming. Pre-gaming mechanicking. Okay, that's
no.
But yeah, sorry, I cut it off before I got too far. But I would say that as games have become more advanced, there is this weird little time period where basically you could take old games, yesterday's games, and use those rules verbatim and just put them into a normal game, and that would equal a minigame. That's not really true anymore, right? Like, you couldn't take, like, The Witcher 3 or any part of that and put it into a new game.
Right. We put the entirety of Demon Souls as part of a minigame in our... It's like, what?
Yeah, no one would want to do that. I mean, think about, like, for a decent example of this, the Day 9 and his friends playing adventure games, and one of them was they played the Nancy Drew series, or a couple games out of the Nancy Drew series. And notoriously, one of them, basically the first whole act of the game was them going around And instead of doing like any like classic adventure game puzzle solving, mystery solving, they like actually found a puzzle book, like that you would actually buy in real life, and had to complete like copious amounts of Sudoku,
Yeah.
and oh crap, what was some of the other ones? They're kind of classic like newspaper-ish, puzzle book games that you'd have to do. They work really well in terms of a digital version, but that was like the whole thing, and that doesn't so. There's good ways and bad ways to do that. That was just miserable, right? That was like playing a crappy puzzle
Yeah.
game.
Yeah,
As opposed,
it was not an enjoyable experience to watch, and you could tell from watching the guys that really to play it was not enjoyable either.
well, yeah, the other two just checked out. Remember, at one point,
Oh yeah, they were talking about something completely different.
intensive like 6x6 Sudoku, like 6x6x6x6 Sudoku, and they just like talked about other stuff. So yeah. Anyway, point is, those types that sort of like it's not quite as simple as just taking a game, an established game and a good one like Sudoku, and just throwing it into your own game.
Yeah.
But there was this time where they're like think about racing games, for example. The borderline, the bare minimum racing game, even like a 2D sense, right, where like the world's moving towards you basically, and you're on the
Right.
bottom edge of the screen, and you just have to move left and right. That basic idea that used to be what racing games were, right? That was like the pinnacle of racing game technology, and particularly in arcades. And then later, for other games, like this would probably be like late 90s, early 2000s ish, you'd had these racing game mini games kind of pop up in games that weren't of the racing genre, and it was basically that.
Right.
And they were basically as sophisticated as those were. It was just 10 to 15 years later. And hence it wasn't the main gameplay. So there is there's some interesting little I don't know, something to pick up on there in terms of, it is sometimes almost as simple as being able to throw in, or like a version of Tetris, right? Maybe not
Tetris, yeah. Breakout
So-
shows up like all the time as a mini game.
Exactly. That those were a thing as games were developing. Like I said, nowadays, pretty much impossible to do that, given the complexity of games.
Right.
I don't know. There's this threshold that I think we reached where games got too complex to turn them into mini games by themselves.
Yeah.
But
Well-
anyway, let's start talking examples. Think like
Well, I think it raises the question of like, what is the purpose of a mini game? Like, if you can have good mini games, and you can obviously have mini games that just kind of detract from the story, and you're either thinking why the player's thinking why is this here, or worse, they have to play the mini game and then they just hate you because you're like, this is not the game I wanted to play, developer.
Right.
So we can start talking about examples, but I think I want to keep in the back of our heads like, is this a good addition or a bad addition? So.
Yeah. At that point, fine. Let's actually we want to just talk about the pretty simple criteria we have there.
Sure, yeah.
We're going to-
So some categories we have for understanding the purpose of minigames and what function they play in a game is we submit that video games are good if they either contrast with the existing game, and that is you're doing something in the minigame that is fairly different, either in pacing or in maybe the amount of mental activity or maybe the amount of action than the main game, or if you're practicing a similar skill but in a slightly different way. So, like,
Right.
for example, in a hardcore platforming game, if you are now, like, racing to the end of the game, or racing to the end of, like, a mini game or some particular stage, or it makes me think of, I'll go right into an example here, Super Smash Brothers, the original, where you had, like, the break the targets.
Mhm.
Like, you're having to do very targeted attacks. And that is something that you do in Smash. But Smash
Right.
isn't mostly about hitting targets, it's about fighting opponents. And so it simplifies the dynamic of Smash, where you're trying to read an opponent and deal with a moving target, or at least one that's moving rather erratically compared to the really standard patterned moving targets you had to hit in the minigame. And I think that's a great example of augmentation, because you get to practice an important skill in the game, but in kind of a reduced version.
Yeah, exactly. So the contrast and augmentation. And to be clear, there's also both of those things you can still have. It's not that those are necessary for any minigame. It's necessary for good inclusion of a minigame in a game.
Right. There's also, I think there's probably like a secret category here, which is like if you just want to include an Easter egg, like I think that kind of makes sense. If you want to have like a throwback or just do some fan service, but
Right.
in order for it to be like, wow, this added something to the game and isn't just like a fun little thing to do on the side,
Yeah.
I think you want to have one of those two.
Particularly when they're necessary, they're gating, they're necessary for actual motion. The example I'm thinking of, Mark was already mentioning it in terms of the racing mini games showed up in a lot of the platformer games that I played when I was younger. Particularly kind of that holy trinity that I always talk about on the PS2, which was part of my golden era of gaming, which was the Ratchet and Clank series, the Jak and Daxter series, and the Sly Cooper series. Each one of those had a trilogy by the original developers before they moved on, and then those were probably the games I played the most growing up, at least in that time period. And each one of them has a built-in racing dynamic. Sly a little bit less, but both Ratchet and Clank and Jak and Daxter have like a whole side minigame where you play, you do these. In Ratchet and Clank, it's hoverboard racing, and in Jak and Daxter, it's hover bike racing. Hovering was really cool in the 2000s. Trust me.
Yeah, it was.
Hovering was the shit.
Yeah, man. Back to the Future got everybody thinking. Or the third one or whatever got everybody thinking about hovering.
But yeah, I like, and there's love-hate in it, right, too, because think again, the primary thing with Ratchet and Clank was weird weapons and cool combinations of that and blowing stuff up. So suddenly having to master a pretty simple racing game within the game to move forward, which you did. There was gated content to it, at least in the first one. I think maybe the second one. I think they might have dropped in the second one. But point is, that was super, super different. So the contrast was there, right? You were blowing almost nothing up. There was no weapon usage. It was purely learning a track. And basically, in a lot of those, you pretty much had to just learn that you'd played enough times where you memorize the track, figure out what the perfect run is, and then just do it, right?
Right.
As opposed to, say, like an actual racing game where you do have to memorize the track, but there's a lot more mechanics to it. Ratchet and Clank and Jak and Daxter, pretty darn simple.
Right.
The second part that Mark was talking about, I think, was the reason that those didn't... I didn't like them. I remember that my brother and I weren't too big fans of them, but they weren't absolutely grating and made us stop playing the game entirely, right? Like, I have a great example for after this that we've talked about, but they were enough in terms of those games did have, Jak and Daxter, probably more so than Ratchet and Clank, but they did have, basically extreme platforming DNA to it, where the whole point of the game was being able to move around and timings and besting, enemies that were roughly predictable. Yeah. And all things went into the racing games, and so it felt, it wasn't too far. Take, for example, a horrible attempt at this, which was extreme contrast and absolute zero augmentation. The classic Sonic Adventures big storyline, Big the Cat, where you go from a game was literally about moving fast, gotta go fast, the game.
Pretty much.
To insert like pro bass fishing into it, like shitty pro bass fishing.
That's exactly what Biggs the Cat was.
Well, and it was interesting that the developers mentioned this, right? They recognized that it was a gamble, and the reason they put it in was because it was a big enough game, and this is an interesting point here, Mark. It was a big enough game where they wanted to be able to change up. They had 6 characters, and in large part, each one of the characters was a permutation on that same exact formula that Sonic was, which was going through a linear level as fast as possible, making few mistakes, using really quick kind of motion-based attacks, and moving forward. And they wanted to do something in the game because it was a big, 3D, it was a big, huge launch title for the Dreamcast, and they wanted to do something different and really mix it up for the player.
And that's how we got the Chow Garden.
Well, no, that's actually a different point. But big, ironically, actually, most people tend to talk about the Chow Garden as like one of their favorite parts of that game.
That's true.
That just tapped a really basic need for people to collect stuff, and I think a subconscious love for Pokemon in that generation. But no, the Big the Cat line was, like I said, as far from that as possible, like almost laughably so. They were like, okay, what we can do to mix up? Like, eliminate any motion. Don't make the character move. All right, step 1. 2.
He's got to be a big fat cat. He can't even be capable of fast motion.
Really stupid. They lose things all the time. So that's a great example of you could probably I think you could pretty safely consider the big storyline a minigame because it was so different from anything else in that game, and it failed spectacularly to augment any part of what the Sonic experience was, as opposed to, like I said, those racing minigames and the platformers. Yeah, they're different, but they make a little bit of sense.
Yeah.
I will say, I'm on a roll thinking about these games. There was another one in the Jack games, which was basically, there's another kind of broad category, which I think eventually would evolve into basically QuickTime events, QTEs. But I remember there's a mini game in Jack 2 where you sit and it's like a trial for this mystic, and she has it's a little bit meta in terms of there are these symbols that'll pop out of this like smoking pot, and it's a neck, circle, a square, and a triangle. And they come out in different, combinations, and you have to hit all of them before they like pop out of the pot and they're about to fall on the ground. And before they hit the ground, you have to hit all the buttons that you see, and it gets faster and more complicated. But it is basically you see these buttons. It's a reactionary thing. You see the buttons, and you hit them as fast as you can. If you make mistakes, that's bad. It's a trial sort of thing. And like I said, that one I actually remember hating more so than racing. Again, that was, I think, roughly comparable in terms of the contrast. But it augmented the game very, very poorly. Like there's nothing else in the game that was just the pure QTE stuff. As opposed to the sync kills in God of War. Hint, hint. We might be talking about that at a later date. Big game. But a lot of the big boss kills in God of War were QTE based, and that actually made sense because a lot of the game was combo based. Even in the normal combat loop, you had to be keeping track of your buttons. So suddenly, when you have these kind of sort of mini tasks in the game that ask you to hit buttons in sequence, yeah, it makes sense. Jack and Daxter didn't have any of that. So again, that one I liked a lot less than the racing games, despite the fact that they were both mini games in literally the same game. All right, there we go. That's
short brand.
Acting in my mind, like it was Beautiful Mind-esque, where I saw like Book of Reality in front of me.
You just went through your Sherlock Holmes Mind Palace type thing.
Yeah. That are, probably more like Zach Galifianakis and The Hangover, but...
Yeah, whatever. Same thing.
They're doing that.
But I think that you bring up a good point, which is when you augment a game, you can make it... I would argue you can make it a little harder than when you contrast with a game. Because if you have a contrast with a game, then like you're inherently presenting the player with a task that they haven't practiced recently, and like you actually have no reason to believe that they've ever practiced it, because you don't know what other games they've played. So if you are in the middle of Jack and Daxter, and all of a sudden you introduce like a fighting style game where it's like a 2D combo based fighting mini game, you have no reason to believe the player is going to be any good at that. There's no tutorials, there's no lead up, you don't slowly introduce mechanics like you do in the real game, and so you've got to have it be fairly easy. If you're augmenting, I think you can get away with it being a bit more difficult because some of the skills from the main game will transfer over.
Yeah. And that's actually, even using that fighting one, that made me think Spyro 3. Year of the Dragon, which, yay, they're remastering the entire original Spyro trilogy. That is exciting. But if you didn't hear about that, that was 2 weeks ago, I think they made that announcement. But so there's actually that exact same example in Spyro 3. There is a weird. This is another conversation maybe that we could branch into some other time. But that game introduced actually 4 other playable characters other than Spyro that had maybe 10% of the game was their missions total between the 4 of them, where you would unlock a new character and then you would play a couple levels that were designed specifically for them. Point is, there was another. That's not what I'm talking about. It just made me think of it. But there was one pretty well-defined mini-game-ish sort of thing in the Spyro games called Raceways, which were basically once per world you would have a specific place that was just about it was just about pretty hard platforming, actually, as opposed to platforming kind of time trial, more racy areas where you would fly. You could fly permanently in these areas, and they're kind of collectathon-ish sort of things where you had to collect all these things in this amount of time, or race this thing, or do this time trial. And so those were kind of like a mini-ish version, mini-game within a game for Spyro, in terms of, it was it was not too far from that main dynamic. It was just a different version of what you normally did, so it worked pretty well. And they had to make it pretty hard because it was something you were already used to in terms of the spiral movement, right?
Right.
Or just that was a normal thing you did. So they just made it a harder version of that with a few different with a few different rules, and that would be pretty light contrast and heavy augmentation, and it worked. And in general, those were pretty fun. Some of them are really freaking hard, but they were fun. There's another one in Spyro 3, which was actually literally a fighter. You become a Yeti with boxing gloves, and you have to punch another Yeti. And it's not quite 2D. It's like almost 3D. It's really bad. Like it's really bad, and it's really hard. Like there's two controls for it. You can pretty much just like move around, and like the reach is really ill defined, and it's really unclear what you have to do to be good at it. And there's nothing else in the game anywhere close to boxing. So that's almost zero augmentation and huge contrast. And again, it fails miserably. That was like notorious between my brother and I as like one of our least favorite parts of that entire game was the weird boxing match that you had to win 3 rounds in. Because it was literally like going from normal Spyro to crappy boxy simulator.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I think you in large part hit something pretty good there with those two dynamics.
Yeah. Well, it seems like you can do contrast, but you just have to be pretty careful with it. And I would say, if I was advising somebody who was putting minigames in, if it's going to be highly contrasting, then you make it a fun side thing that people can check out, but you don't make it a requirement. Yep. Because people, when they buy a specific genre of game, like they're doing that because that's the type of game they like to play.
Right.
And if you take a game that is entirely run fast and break things like Sonic, and then you introduce a fishing simulator as a requirement to finish the game, you might get some unhappy people. I think if it would have been on the side like the Chow Garden was, it would not have been a big deal.
That's a great point. I think people like the Chow Garden because it had absolutely no effect on the game itself.
Right.
And it's funny, you mentioned that, I forget if I said this on air or not, but literally you wouldn't have beaten Sonic Adventure if it wasn't for me. We had owned Pro Bass Fishing, and I really loved playing that as a kid. I don't know why. I liked fishing in real life, and so I did that. And my brother refused to play. Mark and I would switch on. Sorry, my brother's name is Mark, too, so don't.
Super confusing.
Yeah, we're not going to. I'll skip on calling him my brother. He refused to play the big parts in Sonic. And to finish Sonic, you have to beat every single character, and then you unlock Super Sonic. And I remember actually we finished all the characters minus Big, or he did, and then we waited for like a month and a half. Well, I would sometimes go and play the big missions slowly. Even I, who liked bass fishing, wouldn't even play the big missions because they sucked. They were a worse version of actual bass fishing. But eventually we got through them, and then of course we unlocked Super Sonic, and that was awesome. But at the same time, man, that, like you were talking about, hey, some people might not like it. Like, no, literally, I'm convinced my brother would never have finished Sonic Adventure if it weren't for the fact that he had someone else to play that part for him.
Right. Yeah, so, that's a dangerous thing when you, as a developer, risk the integrity of like your big, masterpiece, the game that you made, because of some small inclusion. Because most developers aren't that committed to their mini games, right? I mean, they're just sort of a small add-on thing.
Well, it's also interesting too. Like, so we've been talking about at least what makes a good one or a bad one, and a few examples here. But yeah, what do you think is the? I mean, we mentioned contrast, basically to have a way to break up the monotony. But I'm interested in that earlier question, which was if you have a good enough game, which again, a lot of the games we've been talking about are considered masterpieces in their own right, or very, very, very good. Why include this stuff? Why was that a seemingly industry standard in single player games of a certain type at least? Across the board. I mean, we talked about, you mentioned Donkey Kong 64.
Oh, yeah, there's so many minigames.
Playing Jack, Sly Cooper, Darksiders, Zelda. It seemed to have been a pretty ubiquitous thing there for a bit. Why do you think that was?
I think that's a great question. And now you've got me thinking about the Donkey Kong 64 minigames and all the weirdness going on inside of that. I think one of the reasons is it gives a really easy way to sort of inject different game modes, like without having it be really wonky, right? Like you can switch genres partway through a game for a little while and have people do something different. Do a shooter instead of a platformer, or a sort of stealth mission. In Donkey Kong 64, there was a number of mini games where you had to sneak through a maze. There were guards with flashlights, and you had to avoid being spotted. Think like Super Dumbed Down Splinter Cell. It played more like that than like most of the game, which was just platforming, a combat with enemies and puzzle solving, and so that would be my guess. Is like it just provides a way to break up the monotony, which we've already talked about.
I would say. Go ahead.
That's fine. I'm still thinking.
Okay. I was saying, I think, certainly from the player's experience, the player's side, that makes sense. I say from the developer's side, it also would make sense in terms of purely just, actual elongation of content in games. All these games are obviously before the DLC era, and I don't really know the interior to game development in terms of what it looked like on the back end, but my guess is that they were under a decent amount of pressure to be able to deliver a certain amount of game. And in some cases, I would imagine it would be pretty darn easy for those developers. I wonder if you were to go talk to them and think about hey, why did this part make it to the game? I wonder if there wouldn't be a substantial portion of it would be we were running out of time, and we had some semblance of vision for this part of the game, which was, hey, you do this thing, then you do something else, then you go back to doing this thing. And we didn't know exactly what that something else was going to be, and eventually came down to it. We spent a lot of time trying to perfect the actual gameplay loop and gameplay mechanic that was going to be the vast majority of the game, and we had these little gaps to fill here, there, and 2 or 3 little gaps across the game, and the easiest way to do that is to basically put in these pre-existing games of yesteryear that are simple and people will recognize pretty easily, and did that. There might be another side of it could be developers actually there was some semblance of personal. Again, I'm thinking these are mostly older games. I wonder how much of it could have been just personal preference on the parts of the developers. Maybe some of them had been pretty heavily inspired by certain games like this and wanted to be able to throw a little kind of head nod on where they look. I was just thinking about that actually, hacking in BioShock.
Yeah, well, that seems like an interesting category we haven't touched yet. That it actually minigames can provide developers a way to make tasks that should be complicated in the game world complicated for the player, but to have the player do something completely different than what the task actually requires. So
it's a great idea. A great point is instead of just having press X to hack this thing, develop or actually literally put hacking in the game, which is not fun. To have a simplified way to do that. That's a great point.
Yeah.
But then it begins to beg the question of so when I think about the Deus Ex series, which had a pretty involved hacking mechanic too. Probably a little bit more so than BioShock. BioShock was quite brilliant. It was a mini spatial reasoning game basically, with pipes and stuff.
It's literally a game called Pipe Dream. If you want to talk about yesterday's games being today's minigames, that would be an example.
Yeah, but anyway, so Deus Ex hacking could be considered a minigame in terms of just the mechanics, but it was also designed to be, that game was designed to be, a game that you could get through in a number of different ways. You could do lethal, you could do stealth, you could do hacking, were kind of the 3 ways you could do it. And so it was less a mini game and more a actual mechanic, but a mini game-esque mechanic. It's interesting. There's as with probably most things in games, it's a spectrum. It's not as clear as just hey, this is a mini game or this isn't. In BioShock, hacking was super, super, super useful. I would probably call that a mini game, particularly in terms of its execution. But Deus Ex, hacking was an accepted. It wasn't a mini game. It was a completely plausible, possible way to play the game, and a legitimate strategy. But again, in execution, it was kind of this mini thing that you could do. So,
what did they have you do in hacking in Deus Ex?
What do you do?
Yeah.
It is so you have there's nodes basically. It's hard to. I don't know if I'll be able to explain it well.
Okay.
It's kind of the 3D representation of a security system, and there's different nodes, and you have to basically you have to get to this point, this final node. If you get to it before the security system does, you're both doing the security system, and you have to do it faster or cleverer to get to this final point in this maze, basically.
Gotcha. Okay.
And there's different, there's a few different pieces of upgrades and stuff that you can do to get through it, but it basically runs. There's not a whole lot of execution as much as more strategy, really. With you utilize your tools, and in reality, like in Bioshock hacking, you pretty much would use to either gain control of enemy mechanical enemies, or what else would you do? I'm sure you'd open doors. I feel like you could hack. You could hack machines to get better prices, like vendors. But anyway, in Deus Ex, you actually can literally use that to certainly to open doors that you would use to get around enemies. You could hack security systems to kill enemies instead of having to do combat. You could hack like enemy cameras or visual systems to make stealth way easier.
I love like exactly what you're describing here, the consistency of like what you're accomplishing through hacking, right?
Yeah.
Like if you were to go hack and the mini game for hacking was like get out your gun and like shoot these targets, like that's exactly what they're trying to avoid. They're trying to avoid combat. Like the person who wants to take the hacking route probably wants something a little bit more strategic and mental and a little less action oriented. And so the mini game follows that, and I think that's brilliant on the part of the developers.
Yeah, no, I mean Deus Ex. I'm thinking specifically of Human Revolution, the kind of reboot of the series. That was like 2010 maybe, but yeah, no, that's a good point. Ironically, again, when you were saying hacking, the hacking in Sly Cooper, there's a minigame hacking mission where you are literally a tank in a mainframe having to shoot the enemy security systems, which are it's one of the like left joystick moves you around, right joystick points and shoots. One of those little things. But to note in that one feels, Sly Cooper was way more, obviously the whole game was cel shaded, so it was super cartoony, super silly, and so in that regard, it actually made sense to have this really over the top version of hacking in that game that really wasn't about the fantasy of being a hacker and utilizing skill set to bypass something. It was far more just an excuse for a fun mini game in a silly game. But I think the mini game
in Sly Cooper, you're not given a choice, right? Like you don't have the option to like, do you want to take the hacking route or like the the run and gun route? You just have to play the game regardless.
Right. Yep. That's interesting. So, did you have anywhere to go after this? I had another thought.
No, you can go ahead.
Well, so yeah, I'd say the takeaway for me from that whole little kind of digression, I think, would be that it's a spectrum, right? There's different levels of the way minigames can be utilized, and the line between minigame and mechanic, I think, depends on the choice that you have, as well as the results of the minigame, right? Like, if you're playing a minigame, like in Donkey Kong 64, where it's basically just to, like, you do it, it's over, you progress, or even Ratchet and Clank, it was kind of more of like a side mission. I think that was progression. But, like, some of them, I think there were some, you could keep on doing it to, like, win money, and that was, like, you had a really easy version of the race, and then you could do, like, more versions of the race, and that was to, like, win money. But you really didn't need to.
Right.
And for those games, for something where, like I said, it would be used within the game to actually solve kind of the main puzzle of the game, or the main movement or narrative, like in the hacking in Deus Ex, that feels more like a mechanic. And then you have stuff like Bioshock, which is like, that feels like a mechanic, but also it's an execution-based minigame, so it, like, in reality it kind of plays like a minigame, but it is it's not quite a simple side thing that you do, and it doesn't really affect anything because you can't opt into it. So anyway, it seems like it's quite a sliding spectrum there.
Well, the idea of like intricate mechanics being replaced with minigames is really interesting to me, because like you give the player a sense of like, okay, like there's a lot of moving parts to like picking a lock. Like there's kind of like a finesse to it. You've really got to feel it out. You've got to take some practice to do it. And it's you can't really capture those nuances in the current game systems that we have.
Unless you did like game.
What's that?
Unless you did a lock-picking game by itself, where you invent a whole, control scheme that is designed to make you feel like licking pots. Really, that's Picking locks, rather, not licking
Yes,
pots.
licking pots. Yes.
But you
Yeah.
have a
No.
lick.
Exactly. Like you can think of a way to like make it a mini game so that you have a better sense of like the intricacy of what's going on. But like if you in Assassin's Creed just like went up to a door and it was just like now you're picking a lock, like there wouldn't be a good control scheme that they could put on top of that. That would make sense. Like
Yeah,
you've got to really take the player into like almost like a different state of mind where they're looking at a different screen with different controls so that they can really feel like they're picking a lock because there's so many little things you have to pay attention to.
and again, there's levels of that. There's Assassin's Creed, where I'm pretty sure you go up to a door and you press square and it picks it. And
Right.
then there's Skyrim, where you do have a lock-picking minigame, which is super, super simple.
Mm-hmm.
It's just two joysticks and then a button. And but that is also based around another pillar of the game in Skyrim, which is like ranged combat, melee combat, magic, or stealth,
Right.
and lock. And it's the same thing where you can get around other puzzles or get around people that you wouldn't otherwise if you utilize lockpicking well. So again, that feels more similar to the Deus Ex side to me with hacking, where it is a really simple mechanical mini game that doesn't get anywhere close to the way that real lockpicking would be, and you could certainly make a more intensive lockpicking game. But it does also play into it is more intentional as opposed to a side thing, right? It's actually supposed to be part of the game if you so choose to take that route, as opposed to
Mm-hmm.
like I feel true mini game, quote unquote, would be an aside basically, as opposed to kind of a part. So this brings me to a one. I was thinking about this when we were talking about games of yesteryear being today's mini games,
Uh huh.
and I came to one interesting example because we even mentioned right that you can't take Witcher 3 and put it into a current day game.
Yeah.
Or well, Witcher 3 is an interesting example in that it actually spawned kind of this just goes into a discussion of mini games in general. Gwent is a game by itself now, and the whole idea of it has roughly the depth of something akin to Hearthstone, even in terms of its and yet that was a complete mini game in terms of the context of Witcher 3, and yet it blew up into its own entire game. And there's people who will play more Gwent than Witcher 3 in Witcher 3.
That's interesting.
That's worthy to me that like their mini game card game it's pretty darn simple, but it's also really intensive, and it has blown up into a legitimate like online card game by itself.
So there we see the opposite happening, where actually mini games are becoming full games, whereas full games used to be made mini games.
Right. Well, and that's a specific one, which is card games, right? Like, can you throw a card game? I don't know. That's an interesting. The idea of card games. Maybe we could do an episode on that at some point too. The idea of online card games and how it differs from, even just normal card games, collectible games like Magic the Gathering on a table, or the original Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh.
Mm-hmm.
And how those dynamics are changed in a electronic setting, a video game setting. But
Well, the two aspects you can really introduce a lot of in a card game, in my opinion, from the many card games I've played, is luck and strategy. And so
Yeah.
you can have super strategic card games. You can have games that are entirely about luck, like War. But if your game is like short on one of those categories and you want to inject a little bit, having some dusty tavern where you can play cards does seem like a really good idea. And I don't know, I haven't played Witcher 3 extensively, so I'm not really familiar with how much like luck is involved in the game. But
Witcher 3 or Gwent?
Witcher 3.
Okay.
So I can't really speak into whether or not that's a good augmentation, but it's clearly people like it as a game all on its own.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing too. I remember playing, Witcher 3 falls into that category for some, honestly, of the, potentially too big to even finish. It's a wonderful, breathtaking accomplishment, but at the same time it's gigantic and imposing in a lot of ways. And I remember you get introduced to Gwent maybe like 2 hours into the game or so, maybe a little bit less. Very much the first tavern you get to. So it depends on how many side missions you do, but I think Xander and I did the one where you find the frying pan for the woman.
Nice.
And we ended up at a tavern and learned Gwent. But it's Gwent by itself is actually, it took us probably 10 to 15 minutes to learn, just straight up, which is much longer minigame-esque, tutorial that you get in a game. So that's it's interesting to me. Again, maybe Witcher 3 just got a pass for being so good. To me, just explaining this sounds like it shouldn't have worked, right? It seems to go
Yeah,
in
no,
our
it doesn't.
contrast augmentation little framework there. It seems to fail both of them miserably.
So,
I mean, I guess it kind of
as
well, but
somebody who actually went through that, like, what compelled you to spend the 10 to 15 minutes to learn the card game?
honestly, because it was fun. It was fun. It was clever, and it was something. At that point, it was something. I don't know if I would have done that. It was Xander and I, and so we were able to talk through it and able to talk about it. I also had played a lot of Hearthstone and enjoyed Hearthstone, and I enjoy card games just themselves. I'm gonna go right after this cast and go play some Jin with my grandfather because Jin's awesome. Um, but yeah, I mean, in large part, it was I'm not entirely sure why why I sat there and learned it, and then you play it, and we played that for like 40 minutes. It was like the rest of our session we ended up playing that night was playing Gwent, and we made no progress in the game proper. So yeah, that's slightly mysterious to me, actually.
Well, it brings up an interesting question of whether or not Gwent should just be considered a game and not really a mini game. I mean, can you and the idea of can you have a game inside of a game that really isn't a mini game?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question.
Because it's starting to sound almost like that. And I would say as a developer, you start to have a different problem, which is that people lose focus on what your game is trying to deliver because they're busy playing this other game in your game.
Right, this extremely engaging minigame.
Right.
And I think the idea behind that was, I mean, I'm not sure, maybe there was a team was it Project Red, that loved card games and had this little passion side project and wanted to do the game. And it turned out really good, and it blew up. I don't think my guess would be, again, just with the amount of care that was put into that game as a whole, was that they were trying to do something immersive. They built a world. They built a literal thing to do in taverns when you had time, and you could win a little bit of money on it, and it was clever, and it was fun. You can see that a lot in fantasy novels, even. Well, they'll have kind of a take on chess or a simple checkers that'll get explained for a paragraph or two. That just helps the world build and flesh out a little bit. And of course, with this game, they want to make you be able to play it because, hey, we're already playing a game, so it might as well actually allow you to play it a little bit. Right. But they just made one, so it could be that they were doing that, and they just came accidentally that was really freaking good. Right, I think you could define the line between game and minigame gets pretty, or minigame versus game within a game gets pretty blurry there. I think I'd even say quality would be another one within our contrast augmentation one. The minigames we've talked about so far are not sufficient to be games by themselves, right? You couldn't make more of that and then package it as a full game. Gwent, you could though. Gwent actually worked that way.
Right.
It was deep enough by itself as a system that you could expand upon it, and it is successful. So I don't know. Maybe there is just a level of objective quality to it, right? You can't really fake,
Yeah.
I will say the other thing with card games is, in general, the way they work. This is a decent transition to our last point, which is party games and the weirdness of a game that is entirely made up of mini games. I think with card games or just anything competitive like that. Well, I don't know. This doesn't really hold up to the racing analogy, though. Never mind. I mean, I was gonna say basically having someone else to play against, which is the point of party games, elevates that a bit, right? It brings it from just straight, playing against AI to the fact that you actually can play people in Gwent and it's fun, as opposed to, I don't know if you could play people in one of those tiny mini games in a single player game and it'd be fun for too long. Maybe you could. I don't know.
Well, there was one genre of game that wanted to answer that question, one set of developers, and they made party games.
Exactly. Yeah, that was basically it. And I mean, I have many happy memories playing Mario Party. And the other one for me was Crash Bash, which was basically Mario Party for kind of Mario Party-ish. For it didn't have an overworld board. It was just a bunch of mini games that you could play in the Crash Bandicoot universe.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's what I think is the key developer insight for party games. So mini games have really simple game loops because the player has to be able to load up the context to play your mini game in contrast to everything else that they've been doing and play them really quickly, right? And understand what's going on.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
And so those simple loops, while they're good because they're very easily acquired and engaged with by the player, also get boring relatively quickly because they're simple. And there's just not that much you can do. You don't have that much room as a developer to introduce new things in the game.
Side point. I think you just hit on exactly the difference between Gwent and those minigames, right? Is that context, like you said, in theory, for a true minigame, you should load it up. The context should be simple enough where you can figure it out as the player and immediately engage with it. Gwent took like 15 minutes to learn.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, so... anyway.
So...
good point.
Yeah, well, I think that is... Yeah, I think that might be one of the reasons why Gwent might not be a true minigame, but, it's not super important for us to put it into a specific category. But in terms of simple game loops, they get boring relatively quickly. The insight of party games is that simple loops in general are made a lot more fun when you introduce other people, because other people are always unpredictable. Think about the simple loop that is Rocket League. Like it's not a complicated game. It's really simple. But because you're playing against other people, it's almost infinitely like you'll never have the same game twice, basically, and it's always fun. And it's a great game. It's fun to watch. It's fun to play. And the key is having other people to play with. And I think that's really the reason that party games were so successful, is they took these simple, quickly acquired game loops and they added in the chaos that ensues whenever you have people do anything competitive, and you just kind of let it go.
Yep. And then you have enough versions of that, then you just multiply by 16 or whatever, however many minigames you put in the game, however many different little takes on a simple mechanic that you can do, and then suddenly you have and so throw some randomization in there, and suddenly you have a pretty compelling gameplay experience for a couple hours. And the other part of it is that obviously, it's in the word party. Those games are designed to be extremely casual, right? I can't think of too many times where I've sat down and just played Mario Party by myself.
I feel like that would just be really sad.
In fact, that sounds sad. Yeah, I was about to say that.
There needs to be like a slow version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow playing while you do that.
Yeah. yeah, the Charlie Brown Christmas.
Yeah.
But yeah, they are designed to be extremely. And if you wanted to master Mario Party, you could, right? If you sat down and wanted to master those games, the mini games, you could probably do that pretty quick. I think part of the fun of it is that you don't, right? You only ever time you ever play those is when you're playing with other people, so you never practice and get better at those games. You know, when the Bowser face smush thing comes through, I'm not any better at that today than I was when I was 10. Because I haven't I don't know. It's a wonky thing, and a lot of those games. The other thing is a lot of them aren't even that polished, right? They're not even that. I mean, they're definitely all very playable, but they're not precise, right? A lot of times you'll lose and you don't know why you lose, but it's not frustrating, right? It's not
because it's so the penalty for loss is fairly low.
Tiny, yeah. Both in terms of the games themselves as well as the amount of times you play. I wonder how many distinct mini games you play in a normal game of Mario Party over 30, 40 minutes, probably. I don't know, what, 8, 10? Decent number, right?
Yeah.
Large part you probably won't be repeating one, depending on the game. Maybe Mario Party 1 you would, because there weren't as many, but certainly when you start to get up there, they'd get more advanced.
Well, one of the things you said about how you don't really practice those games, I think they really don't ask to be practiced. They're simple enough where you wouldn't think, you know what, I'm going to devote an hour to just playing this one mini game, because it wouldn't really be fun. And so it kind of resists being practiced because it gets boring.
Right. Plus, honestly, and I don't know, this might just be Slash maybe getting a little bit off kilter here, but how much do you really want to play a party game and just wipe the floor with everyone? How fun would that be?
That guy,
including you. I don't know. Maybe that would be fun. Once, but the point of those games isn't necessarily it's fun when you win. I think I've won Mario Party once in my life, but that's not the point, obviously. And so being really good and having optimized strategies or having figured out exploits or kind of pseudo cheats for these different levels and just killing everyone I don't know that I don't know, maybe that would be fun because then you have someone to gang up on as the rest of the team and yada yada yada. But in general, that's not the like final state that the game is trying to encourage in and of itself.
Right.
And hence
and
that.
the skill ceiling is relatively low on these games too. I mean, you can only
Oh
be
yeah,
so good at a lot of these games.
and there's a lot of randomness to them, right? Think about like
Exactly.
the one Mario Party where you're digging right randomly towards like the gold,
Yeah, and
like
there's
2D dig, and
uh-huh.
it's like whatever. I don't know, like hit the buttons as fast as you can. It's basically just really simple tactile motion
Hmm.
that's be like intrinsically satisfying, and then like random reward. There's actually probably some interesting psychological like most of those games are probably very basic psychological trainings.
Well,
you know,
actually, yeah, I mean, I think that's probably true. But I think another facet of party games, which I find interesting, is that you can, if you diversify your game selection enough, you're
mm-hmm.
going to even the playing field because just people tend to not be good at everything. Like the person
Yeah.
who's really good at button mashing probably won't also be able to play like a really strategic game of like, stay off the tile that's about to turn into lava or something.
Yeah, sure,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Or like just even basic, like think Shy Guy Says memory versus like the memory for when it shows you just have to match all the like the really really easy one Mario Kart or Mario Party where you have to match all the different symbols together. You have to jump
Right.
and match them. Like those are two kind of distinct types of memory that one person might be really good at and one person might suck at, and that's just like you said, that's a good random just kind of distribution of people's talents.
Right, and that helps the whole party aspect because you really want it to be fairly even playing field. Obviously there's going to be people who are more familiar with the game, but you don't want anybody to just like run away with it because they're super good at this one task.
I think I'll bring up one more piece of this, which is when I was thinking about games that are just mini games. That made the first place we went was party games, but I think those are distinct in terms of they are, they're the mini games are tied together. They're all consistent. There's an overworld connecting them, and there's the social aspect. I think there are actual games that are even a pure example of that, like We Play, for example.
Yeah,
That's a
and
really group of tiny mini games. What was the other one you talked about?
the Game and Watch Gallery for the Game Boy Color. Well, not originally, but yeah, I had a Game Boy game called the Game and Watch Gallery that was literally just you go into like a start menu, you have like a grid of games you can pick from, and then you
Right.
just played that mini game, and you got different awards for like getting high scores in different categories. So like there was sort of an overarching thing, but like the games weren't at all connected.
Yeah, and same thing with We Play, right? That was a complete and utter, in some ways very pure example of there was no connection. There was no progression. There was no record keeping. There were just all these wildly different mini games. Basically, kind of was like a what you'd think about today is like kind of an indie like showcase of of a few like concepts that were fleshed out. Side note: the best one by far. Did you ever play We Play?
Oh yeah.
Okay, what was the best game?
It's a tie for me between the bow and arrow and the bowling.
The bow and arrow and the what?
Bowling. Actually, I think the bow and arrow was like We Play Advanced, so probably bowling.
I was gonna say, well, bowling was sports. I'm thinking
Oh,
like,
dang it! What was in We Play?
well, there were all kinds of stuff. There was like a weird like pinball version. There was a like air hockey, like a psychedelic air hockey one. It was mostly motion controlled, right? Because it was Wii. The best
Right.
one was you're like it's this like you're riding a cow.
What the heck?
You know this one.
No.
You're riding a cow, rodeo music, and the cow is just like barreling forward, and you can control it by tilting the Wiimote left and right, or popping it to jump it, and you have to like sprint through this farm, like getting coins or something. What are you collecting? Carrots, maybe?
That sounds
And
amazing. I've never played that.
it's really stupid and it's really fun. We would actually legitimately sit down to play that. And so this is an example of We Play was super hit and miss in terms of there were like 3 games that were kind of fun and like 9 that weren't. And so like We Play to me isn't We Play, it was the cow game. Like that's the only reason I would play that game.
Right.
So I think that's a more true example of, like you said, those mini games are games that are not sufficient by themselves to really be played.
Right.
And it was more of a random thing, as opposed to the party games, which I would say Mario Party would be slightly sad, but you could actually play that by yourself, and I think I could see how that would be enjoyable. I mean, same thing with Crash Bash. We didn't talk about that much, but that was a supremely fun group of mini games and rules and different ways to do it. That game was also built a little bit more for single player in terms of had different types of challenges that you could do and were designed to be done with at least one that could be done with one person pretty easily.
Yeah.
But in any case, I would say the true mini game. I'd say party games are distinct in terms of they are a brilliant usage of mini games. I think like a really cool way to make mini games work. I think a true mini game just it lives or dies off its best mini game basically.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. That like when you have a collection of games like that, it's usually there's a contrast between there's one or two really good games and the rest of them are sort of meh, and you end up not really playing those as much. One of the things I was thinking about when we were talking about party games was, and this is going to be a bit of a shout out to our one of our previous episodes about gaming and movement in 4 parts. But taking this idea of context acquisition in minigames, right? I said in minigames you have to be able to understand what's going to happen very quickly and then just go and do it, and it's relatively simple. And there are games that have pushed that to its limit and made context acquisition a very important part of the game, i.e. Wario Inc. is a great example of this, where you're literally presented a minigame in like 3 seconds, and then you have to do it. And there's no, like in Mario Party, you have like the splash screen at the beginning that tells you all the instructions. And like you can look at those instructions as long as you want and make sure you understand the game. And so you've got as much time as you want to really understand what's about to happen. And
that's great.
Wario Inc., you have 3 seconds. And so part of the game is how fast can you adapt to a new game.
Yeah, the main skill, the actual the actual game there is, in fact, adaptation, right? And content acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a great thought. That's a cool, and that worked for that reason, because that main gameplay loop, which is that's a compelling loop, is trying to figure stuff out quickly, right? It's not necessarily about the actual mechanic of the game once you play it, each mini game individually, right? It's actually a cool meta idea about games that you get to play over and over,
right?
And so that's why that works. So that's another flavor of how to use tiny mini games. I mean, we could also begin breaking this down even further. Like, we obviously don't have time for this, but you could begin defining games by each mechanic being a mini game, right? Like where does that begin and end? Like think about the combat in Arkham, right?
Sure.
Like that's kind of a distinct. I've talked about how the Arkham games are made up of 3 things. They're made up of the stealth portions, the collection portions, and then the combat. And the combat could be seen as a minigame of sorts, in terms of there's very set, simple procedures. When you do this happens, and you can win the area, and then it's over.
Right.
And, it's not too fluid, actually. There's not too many. Like, think about, like, combat in Skyrim. Also very simple, but, like, that can be done in a bunch of different ways. Actually, the Arkham combat has to be a very select set of rules that have to be in place for it to work in a very kind of confined area.
Right. To the extent that the subset of mechanics you use for a particular activity is disjointed from the rest of the mechanics, it's going to start feeling more like a mini game. Like if when you do combat, like you go to a different screen and that's where combat happens. In for example, most turn-based RPGs. It does start to feel kind of like a minigame, because like the rest of the world goes away. I'm in a completely different camera angle. I've got menus that I don't usually have. It's totally different.
Act changes. Yeah. Huh, that's interesting. That the melding of mechanics actually is what makes it what it's if you think of a game as a bunch of different mini games combined, then how well they're melded and how well they are I don't know how fluid they are and be able to transition between the two, or how ill-defined maybe they are. One ends and the other begins is probably what will make it feel more or less like a mini game.
Right. And I think it'll make the game feel a bit more fluid in general, which is why the later Final Fantasies, the encounters in those later games tend to feel a bit more fluid, because there isn't as much of a shift between what you're doing in the main world and what you do in combat.
Exactly.
So it tends to be a bit more fluid. But
maybe fluidity in games would be a good topic. Write that down.
I will. But next week we're going to be talking about God of War. So we are at the end of the episode here, but tune in next week. We know God of War 4 has come out recently, and we're excited to talk about it. It won't be strictly a review. We tend to not really do that, but it will be a discussion about some different aspects of God of War, and we will be including the fourth game in that. So,
For sure. I'm super excited. That was one of my favorite games. I've mentioned my first M-rated game I ever got was God of War 2, so I'm over the moon to get to talk about this.
yes, it's going to be
So we
exciting.
as always, hit us up on all of the appropriate areas. Also, shout out to Xander, who is currently on his honeymoon, got married. It was a beautiful wedding this past weekend. All love in the world to my man.
Yes, if you want to hear Xander speak, you can go listen to our episode on Doki Doki Literature Club or Left 4 Dead, and he's on the podcast. So, see you later, guys. If you enjoyed this episode of Gaming Mechanics, check out our Twitter @Gaming Mechanics or our Facebook by going to facebook.com/gamingmechanics. Thanks for listening.